Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reds Rundown podcast, hosted by two lifelong Reds fans and journalists. I'm Rob. He is Joe, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Joe, how's it going today?
Going pretty good. We're getting closer to baseball season, which is always a good thing. Rob, how are you doing?
Dude, I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to some baseball even this weekend. As early as this weekend, we will have spring training games being played. We've got a pretty full slate of things to talk about this week. As a quick reminder, this does come out every Monday. We're going to try to have it out sometime in the afternoon, generally. Hopefully at least around noon, but you can catch us. There were a couple people asking. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those great places for your podcast. And then if you like seeing our ugly mugs, then you can, continue to watch us here on YouTube as well. So just wanted to throw that out there. And we're going to be starting something new this week as well. Our question of the week, which is going to be, who do you think our starting five will be for the rotation in 2024? And we want to know, let us know in the comments section below who you think it's going to be. You can try to factor in injuries or not. There was a very quick story I saw about Nick Lodolo and him not feeling completely back to normal yet, but he is feeling like, it's stronger, healthier. Clearly, whatever that injury was, because they seem to be very secretive about it, was pretty insane. It must have been quite hellacious to come back through. But we'll have to see what he ends up doing. So let us know what you guys think, again, in the comments section below. But we're going to get started, Joe, with something that you brought up when we were talking about it a little bit at the end of last week, that David Bell came out in a statement claiming that he's expecting Elly at shortstop and McLean at second, pretty much as our starters. That, to me, sounds like almost a declaration, a true statement of what the expectations are this coming right off the heels of a Jonathan India new contract. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is just setting the tone, letting everyone know what their role is going to be. It's going to be those two guys mainly playing those two positions. Yes, McLean will play short. Elly will play third some days to give guys off days and to keep everyone fresh. But this is the most expected thing you're going to see is you have these two young guys. You didn't go sign a lot of high-profile free agents. You want these guys to get at bats, and you want them to finish the season strong. So it makes perfect sense, and it's good to have the depth that they have, and they can move everyone else around. I worry a little bit about the defense. I'm not a big defense matters guy. I think the numbers will tell you that. How teams are playing different players will tell you defense just doesn't matter as much in today's game, and that's why we have all these guys playing multiple positions. So that's the only thing I'm a little bit concerned about. But again, I'm not as concerned as other people like, oh, the defense is going to be awful. Well, they just clearly there's not a premium on defense anymore in the league.
Well, and I think, to be fair, I think McLean's a much better defender than Jonathan India, so I think you do get better at second base. And I think a lot of the issues that we saw with Elly is just because his tools are very raw. I think people will continuously forget that this guy's only 21, maybe 22 years old. I mean, he's very young still. His lanky body really came about as he, got into the league essentially over the last few years. I don't know if you remember when you were 21, but you may have still been growing at that point. I think I was done, but there are apparently people who still do. So, I think that he's just kind of getting into his body more, and they have Barry Larkin to teach them. Like, I know that may not count much for most people, but he's one of the best defensive shortstops in the last 30, 40 years. So, I think that he's going to really be able to offer them a lot of good insight. He's already been at spring training as well. So, I'm not too worried about their defense. I think Elly has the potential to be a plus defender. I know he is not right now, but I think with more time at the position and, consistent reps, I think he can be somebody who can make some pretty great plays. Ultimately, I do think his future is somewhere maybe at third base or in the outfield because of just how freaking tall he is. But I'm not overly worried about him defensively, and I think he's... I don't know. I'm just glad that David is setting these expectations, because I think that this is more for the fans than it is necessarily for the players right now, because I'm about 99% sure they talked with Jonathan India when they were giving him this new contract and let him know. And I think this is just so that people won't be questioning, where's McLean going to play? Where's Elly going to play? Where's, Indy going to play? Like, Indy's going to get reps at second. McLean's going to get reps at short. Elly's going to get reps probably at short and third, and that's just going to be how it goes. So I don't know if you have any extra thoughts on that, but that's kind of where I'm at with it, and I'm not too worried.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with the defensive play of Ellie or McLean at either of those positions. I think more just everyone else is the issue of having guys who were brought up as shortstops, who are playing in the outfield, guys who are moving around the infield. That's where you kind of get a little bit different, and you don't have that consistency that you would like in terms of playing a position and being comfortable once you get into more important games down the later summer and into the postseason. That could come back to bite them. But if you have Ellie playing shortstop mostly every day, and McLean mostly playing second base every day, I would feel pretty confident about those guys playing well. It's the other guys I would say I'd be more worried about than them.
Yeah, me too. And we're going to have to see. I mean, they've got a plethora of different, players to put at these positions. And I think it's really important to remember that they still will take defense into consideration, but ultimately it is going to be whose bats are hot, whose are not, and I think that's one of the great things that we have in terms of depth. There are going to be players who are going to get more playing time because maybe they're doing both really well, right? So I just think that mostly people need to, set their expectations at maybe a middle level, a medium level in terms of these two right now and see if they exceed them defensively and offensively. But I think this is a good opportunity for us to move on to the next topic, which is injuries. We already have a couple small injuries, nothing too major. Alex Young has a back injury, which they are anticipating is going to be very, very quick. Something else with Sam Moll, too, which I did not know that he was dealing with any injuries. It recently came up, I think over the weekend, actually. And if it came before that, I just didn't see it. But he is also dealing with an injury. Both are expected to be fine sometime during spring training and then get to, opening day and should be okay. What's really interesting to me is we now have 3 lefty relievers, something that we had, one of for most of the season last year. I still personally feel like it's really rare for a bullpen to carry more than 2 lefties, unless if the closer is also a lefty, and even then, 2 seems to be the max amount. I do think that this injury does affect Alex Young the most, to be honest with you, Joe, because Sam Moll was amazing last year. He's been really good in general just the last few years. I think he's got a weird arm angle, which is great. But then they also brought in Brent Suter, who's also really good at keeping the ball in the ballpark. Both of these guys get, a lot of soft contact. I think that they are honestly weirdly better than Alex Young, especially for the role that they're supposed to be brought in for. Alex Young, if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and look, but he was actually better against righties than he was lefties, I believe, for the majority of the season. So it is really interesting to see that we're having these injuries already, and people may think, hey, it's the beginning of spring training. Why does it matter? Well, because these are the kinds of injuries when you have a really packed roster that can kind of determine whether or not you make the team. So I don't know, Joe. I think that these are actually more significant than people are talking about just in terms of how the opening day roster could play out.
In terms of the roster playing out, yes, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it means anything. This is having all these left-handed pitchers, and you got to remember Brandon Williamson, who might be coming out of the pen. We'll talk about a rotation in a little bit here.
Yeah.
This was feeding David Bell's addiction to being so heavy on the lefty, righty thing. Mm-hmm. You're right. This is way more lefties than you're usually going to see in a bullpen, but we have a very analytically forward-thinking manager, which to his credit works sometimes, but also doesn't work sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm not too concerned about it. It might hey, maybe Alex Young doesn't make the opening day roster. Maybe Williamson is moving from a starter to a bullpen pitcher. And you have Suter now, too, like you said. So I'm not too concerned about it overall. I think it messes with the numbers. Maybe David Bell can't be as lefty favoritism as he usually has. Maybe he can't do that as much. But at the end of the day, they have this whole offseason was about adding depth. That included starting pitching. That included bullpen. They're going to be fine. It might be some unfavorable matchups at times where you already used your left-handers out of the bullpen. You can't go back to them. But still early in spring training. We have, 40 days until opening day, 39 days, something like that. We have plenty of time for minor injuries to figure themselves out. And I do love the competition based of it, too. Availability is a big thing, but also how these guys pitch in spring training. It's not going to be for Ellie and Matt McLean. We know what they're going to be, but some of these guys fighting to make the roster for the bullpen spots, for moving starters to bullpen, this is really big. So I think that part of it is true. I just think in the grand scheme of things, they did so well in the offseason of adding depth to the bullpen. This probably won't end up mattering in 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I really was. I think maybe I said it on last week's episode, but I thought the Brent Suter, signing was actually the most surprising one because I felt like with Mole and with Alex Young that they had two good lefties. Getting Suter at the price they got him at and bringing him home, like he really is a player that I'm interested to watch. And I'm almost wondering, I think Young still has some options left. I'm almost wondering if they're just going to send him down straight to Louisville and let him get his reps and have him ready in case somebody gets injured. Like we will be seeing, I think, as Reds fans, a lot of really good players down in AAA, which is not something that we've had in a while. It's normally been young players coming up, cutting their teeth, getting their reps down there. Whereas I think this year it's going to be we're stashing veterans, for eventual injuries to occur. So I completely agree with you. I don't think that necessarily it's not the biggest deal, but it is going to be interesting to watch during the roster moves because I think they know what they've got in Young. They've got a better idea of what they've got in Mole. I think Suter, obviously, they have a pretty good idea of what they want considering they actually signed him and traded, for Mole. So I kind of think Young is the odd man out, and that's the reason why I wanted to make sure that we at least discussed it. But there was one other move that was made, and one that I think is absolutely worth a very brief discussion on. Levi Stout getting claimed by the Mariners, the team that traded him to the Reds in the Luis Castillo deal. After the Reds pick up Bubba Thompson for the second time this offseason, which is really interesting to me. Bubba Thompson was once a top prospect in all of baseball with the Texas Rangers for a while. He seemingly is bouncing back and forward. It doesn't seem like he can find a roster spot right now. I have a feeling I know what the Reds are going to do with him, but before I dive into it, Joe, I do think that this is potentially significant because I think these are two really interesting pieces that show kind of where the Reds' mindset's at right now.
Right. So first of all, tough road for Bubba Thompson throughout his career so far. Did get a ring last year for the Rangers.
Sure.
That does count. He played like 40-something games for them, 37 games, sorry. But he's, I think this is more taking a flyer at a position where we are weaker depth-wise at, which is outfield. We have a lot of infielders who are going to be playing outfield. We have, outfielders who are still getting their bearings, like Spencer Steer. And we just don't have the level of depth in the high minor leagues yet in terms of outfielders that you can bring up right away. So I think this is like hey, let's swap their depth out. Levi Stout gets called back by the Mariners. That's fine because we have all this pitching depth that we just kind of talked about, even with lefties, but righties too. We have a lot more pitching depth. I couldn't see a realistic path for him contributing unless it was just a disaster scenarios with injuries. He's 26 years old. It's not like he's a young prospect anymore. Like, he just didn't figure it out. It kind of stinks that he's gone, but at the end of the day, it's just, hey, let's get more depth at the outfield spot and take a flyer on a guy who has had a tough time but has some talent and see how that goes.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note a couple things here as well. Is Bubba Thompson's a speedy right-handed guy, so he adds some defense maybe later in games when you need it. If you want that 27th man, and you don't feel like you need pitching, like he's a perfect guy to call up just to be a late inning defensive guy, late inning steal some bases guy, right? But I also think it's really important that, again, we're going to get into the rotation part of it. I'm not going to talk about potential pitchers that could actually be in the rotation, but there are guys right below that, right? You've got Lyon Richardson, Carson Spears, Christian Roa. They re-signed Brett Kennedy to bring him back. Connor Overton's going to be coming off of injury. Chase Petty has been one of their top guys for a while since they were able to get him from Minnesota, right? They have a lot of guys. Rhett Lauder. God, how could you forget Rhett Lauder? Like, they probably, obviously, they very much value Rhett Lauder over Stout, and I think Lauder would even have a better chance of making the roster at some point than Stout would. Not that Stout's a bad pitcher, but you've got all those guys just as starting pitching depth. So, like you said, I do think you're absolutely right. I think outfield depth is way more important right now, especially because, again, like our righties are very limited right now. We're pretty much almost a lefty-only outfield. When it comes to potential everyday starters, not people who are getting shifted to that position. So definitely, I think a smart move, and it seems to me like Thompson has found a home now with the Reds. If they were willing to let Stout leave, it would be really surprising to me unless if they could find, I don't know, somebody who's got a little bit more power than Thompson, because that's his only big weakness, at least in my mind, is he doesn't have much power. And, even in a smaller ballpark, you still want a righty bat that can, hit that left field porch a little bit more often. But yeah, so I think that's about it on players and news in that regard. We do have games starting this week, Joe. Pitchers and catchers reported last week. Rest of the team will be there starting today, I believe, actually, as of the recording. When I say today, I mean Monday. And we got 2 games going against the Guardians, which we pretty much always start off spring training now since we share a facility with them. And then we have the Angels on Sunday. I will be honest with you, Joe. There are years where I don't watch any spring training games. There are years that I do watch spring training games. Because of how young our team is, I actually think I'm going to be watching a pretty decent amount of spring training games. Now, to be clear, I always check, what did people do, who hit, who got innings pitched, all that kind of stuff. But I never actively really watch the games. I'm probably going to be working on stuff and having the game on, on the side, because I'm really intrigued to see what they're going to be doing with people, where they're going to be putting them in, weird positions and whatnot. And I wanted to know who were 2 players that you were most looking forward to watching during spring training. Like, who do you have your eyes on for all the, listeners and viewers out there to, maybe pay attention to as well?
Well, good luck watching all the games, Rob. I typically do not because I'm covering the NFL draft and college basketball and all that. But
That's
also, Valley Sports doesn't have all the games. Like, a lot of teams have all their games you can watch. Valley Sports doesn't have the Reds games. So that's what you might be listening to some radio, Rob. And that's okay. So I have made, I guess, my thoughts clear. I don't really think spring training is that valuable other than just kind of seeing what you got for the last couple spots of the roster, that type of thing. I'm a big prospects guy. Now, Rob, I know you're not as big college baseball guy, but Rhett Lauder is going to be one you're watching this spring training. Paul Skeens gets all the hype because of LSU, what he did at LSU, the national championship last year. The second pitcher taken in the draft, Rhett Lauder. Really good pitcher for Wake Forest. It seems like so far he's impressed. All the reports coming out is he's impressed in camp so far. So let's see how he does. I do think spring training is the time to figure out what your depth of the organization is, what these prospects can do. It's the same thing as preseason football, right? Like, I'm not watching preseason football to see if Joe Burrow is good. I'm watching preseason football to see how the rookies are going to step in and if some of them can be impact players. And, so Rhett Lauder's one. I'll give a position player 2. I'm going to go Cam Collier. I think he's a very talented player. I think he's another one of these prospects you want to see. When it all comes down to it, in a month, I'm not going to remember how Candelario hit in spring training. I'm not going to remember how Ellie hit in spring training. I'm going to remember how they hit in the regular season. So let me see what these young guys who are fighting to be on the team, or even if they're not on the team yet, fighting to move up the levels of minor league baseball. Let's see how they do.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm the same way. And I'll probably be listening on radio, to be honest with you. But I will say that there are, I think, some really interesting things. One of the things that I look at most, actually, is pitching sequences and pitching speed, right? Velocity, because I do think that you can tell a lot about where players at coming into the season based on velocity. My few years as a pitching coach there in high school, it is important, especially early on, to see them kind of where they're at, where they're potentially going to be, and especially for players coming off injury, which is why my first player to watch is going to be Nick Lodolo. Look, I think, like, talent-wise, Nick Lodolo can be a 1A type of pitcher. The problem is that the Reds are consistently getting, like, new and really good young pitching, right? I think Graham Ashcraft is a lot better than people are giving him credit for. I think Andrew Abbott was a big surprise last year. I think Williamson down the stretch looked like a really solid young pitcher, honestly, teammate of Lodolo's as well. And I think that they've got, the Chase Pettys and the Rhett Lauders who are, and even the Connor Phillips, who are very close to pushing for a potential rotation spot, right? And so I want to see him come out. I want to see him be healthy, and I want to see where his velocity's at, because apparently that's a pretty significant injury to your leg. And if you're not able to get I can't remember which leg it was, but if you can't get good push or you can't get good planting, that's going to be a major, major issue in my mind, and something that we're going to have to watch for, because I think you and I both agree Lodolo's a really good pitcher, but like you said earlier, if he's not available, then it doesn't really matter. So the other player that I really want to watch is actually Stuart Fairchild, which I know a lot of people are going to be like, why do you care about him? I think he's the 26th man right now on the roster, to be honest with you. I think we've got a pretty good understanding of our infielders, most of our starting outfield, but we do need a right-handed, fifth outfielder, I guess, at this point, that can be good. And I think that he's going to have to battle for his position. I think that's why they brought in Bubba Thompson. And I think, they are going to, push him to be better, right? I don't think he's ever going to be starting caliber guy. I think, he's not going to be somebody who has significant innings. But I do think that he needs to be somebody who can come in, add a little bit of power, continue to play good defense. And I want to see him have a nice spring training, because I do think that that's going to be important, because if Bubba Thompson ends up having a really good spring training and Fairchild has a bad one, there's a real possibility that they will end up putting Thompson in over Fairchild, considering I think that they have similar strengths. I do think that as of right now, Fairchild's a better hitter overall, but if he struggles and he continues to have problems with strikeouts and they just kind of want more of a contact guy, considering I think they can go to the bench with a lot of infielders that can come off and hit for power, then Fairchild's job may be, in question. So I think that that's my second player. You and I both have talked about, the fact that spring training is for those kinds of players. So I don't know if do you have any thoughts on either of those players before we hop into our last segment here?
No, I love it. I love that you're going with guys who are kind of more established or guys who are trying to fight for that spot. And then I'm going to look for prospects, different ways to look at it, and still going to have a fun spring training, looking at two different things there. So good stuff.
No, absolutely. And I think it's really important to note too, again, guys, like the Reds' depth is pretty awesome. Like what they've been able to do in the last 3 years has been really, really impressive. I mean, there are a lot of, I think outfield is probably our weakest position right now, and one that I'm really interested to see what they ultimately end up doing, with it. But I do think that it's fun to be able to talk about this stuff, because for spring training, for a lot of these guys, it will be kind of make or break, whether or not they're going to be on AAA or going to be in the majors. So, with that, let's head into our last segment here. I think that my idea with this, rotation prediction, I think we get a couple of the big guys just out of the way right now. I think there are two specific ones that we need to just be like, we'll talk about them briefly and then we'll move on to the rest. I think the first one is obviously Hunter Greene, right? Barring any health or injuries, I'm about 99% sure he's going to be our opening day starter. He did play a lot better, once he came back and was healthy. He's always had that potential. He's still only 24 years old. I mean, he has so much more time before. I've always said that it's generally around 27 where players start to hit their prime. It's like ages 27 to 32, 33 generally in baseball. And so I think that he's still kind of working his way up there. We would like to see better control, but dude, there are games where he is just absolute lights out. So he's my first guy that I'm like 100%. He's going to be in there outside of injuries.
Yeah, Hunter Greene, and I think is a guy who, if he stays healthy, he could be a guy we're talking about at Cy Young possibly this year. I think if he's talked about adding pitches this year, I think the splitter is actually going to be really huge for him just by his arm angle and how much velocity he already has. Mm-hmm. So I think he's the clear front runner. I know Derek Johnson said they don't have an opening day pitcher picked out yet, and I think it is fair to say, hey, let's compete. But I think Greene has the starting nod here. Like he's a step ahead of everyone else in terms of getting this. As much as I love who number 2 is on your list, probably.
Yeah, me too. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be Frankie Montas, right? I think that he's a lock for me. Obviously, they brought him in for that position without a doubt. Now, does he end up being the number 2 guy? I don't know for sure. I'll be honest with you. But I do know that he will be in the rotation barring injury. He's coming off an injury. He was excellent with Oakland. I mean, like truly was like in Cy Young contention, was extremely good. And a lot of people don't make the Sonny Gray comparison because he went to the Yankees, from the A's and now to the Reds. I think the biggest difference is he was injured. That's the only reason why he's not still a Yankee at this point. And I think that Cincinnati seems to be a really good place for people to come and refine themselves, right? I think Derek Johnson, that may be one of his biggest calling cards, is that he's able to take these pitchers like Sonny Gray and Sonny Gray just got a huge freaking contract, and I'm almost certain it's because of his revival that he got with the Reds, right? And so I think that this is a perfect place for Montas to come back. I think that he is going to be, if he is healthy, which he had been most of his career, if I remember correctly, up until this most recent injury, I think he could be lights out. I mean, I think we could be genuinely looking at 2 ace starters for the Reds at the very top of their rotation, and guys that I mean, it makes us absolutely a contender when you can have 2 guys pitching lights out at the top. So that's my number 2 guy right now. That's a lock. He's not my number 2 for the rotation as a whole, but a lock in the rotation.
Okay, we had 2 different number 2s then in terms of, I know you're not number 2 rotation, but number 2 lock. It's Andrew Abbott. He did everything possible to earn a spot this year. Unless something goes terribly wrong with injury or just spring training really spooks him, I think it goes Green and then Abbott. You have the righty, then a lefty. Really showed that location was big for him this past year. He's learned from some of the best in terms of that. I think having a power pitcher pitch first and then a guy who's more of a location guy second really throws hitters off. You have different guys from different lineups because, hey, one's a righty, one's a lefty, so you can't let guys get into a groove against you in the whole series unless they're playing against both righties and lefties, which does happen, but not as much as it used to happen. So I do think it's Green, Abbott, and then I do have Montas, so I'll just get to that right now since you already mentioned Montas as well. I'm very high on him as well. He was signed to do this. He's going to be, I know we talked about it last week, an innings eater, but like, to be honest, having him as the 3rd starting pitcher in here is not like he's just going to be the 5th starter eating innings. He's going to eat innings, but he's going to be good doing it. I like his stuff. I don't mind the Sonny Gray comparisons either. Yes, he was injured for the Yankees. We've talked about some of those ways the Yankees have used their pitchers over the years as well when he did play for them. So I think coming to Cincinnati with Derek Johnson, I think they can get the job done there. I think those 3 are the ones I would say are locks to be in the rotation totally. And then the next 2, whoever you're going to have, Rob, I don't know, but like whoever you're going to have, whoever I'm going to have, we could be sitting here at the end of spring training and they're not in the rotation for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I actually, it's great that you bring that up. Andrew Abbott was my next guy. He was going to be, again, I think he could be ultimately the number 2. I completely agree with you. I love kind of the hard to begin, soft at, next, but I love Andrew Abbott. I think he was, like, I knew that he was going to be solid. I'd seen some of his minor league stats and everything, and he was good, right? Like, I mean, we saw what he was doing. He's out there throwing perfect games. He's out there, striking out guys left and right. And I wondered how well it would translate considering, he's only really topping out around 93, maybe 94 at his best. Dude, what he did, he diced hitters. He reminded me of what we saw in the late 90s, early 2000s, where you have these guys who are able to come in and just be, I don't know, whatever you want to call what Greg Maddux was, right? Where he's such a heady pitcher. And I'm not saying that Abbott's Greg Maddux, but it's that style where it's as important about hitting your spots and, using the right pitches in certain sequences as it is about throwing hard. And I think that he is a very dramatic difference between Hunter Green. So I actually really like that. Maybe I would end up putting him at number 2. I think that was quite the argument for him, to be honest with you. But absolutely 100% agree. He was my 3rd lock. I think he's another guy who could potentially be a secret dark horse Cy Young candidate moving forward, to be honest with you guys. Like, the last thing I'll say on this is there are a lot of power pitchers out there. There are not a lot of pitchers. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of guys who throw hard. And the thing is that once you stop throwing hard, like we saw with pitchers like Matt Harvey, right? Where he stopped throwing hard and he lost his effectiveness. He was out of the league within a couple years. If a guy can consistently throw 92, 93 and have the kind of pitches and I think, again, headiness that Andrew Abbott has, that's a kind of guy that can pitch in this league for 20 years and be very effective. And I like those guys almost as much or more, honestly, than most power pitchers. So what Andrew Abbott has, I think, is amazing, and I am very excited to see him pitch. My number 4 guy is going to be Graham Ashcraft. I brought him up, I think, a little bit earlier. I love what he did. Like, he was so bad. I was like calling for his head. Please stop. Get rid of him. All this stuff. I think he added a cutter. He changed kind of the rhythm of his delivery, which I think was really, really important for him. He cut down on a lot of the extra movements, which as a pitcher, and when I was doing pitching coaching, I really did believe that the more movement you had, that it was just excess. It would make you more tired. It just was unnecessary, and it made it harder to repeat over and over again. Taking all that out and switching that for Graham completely changed his season. He had that really strong start, terrible middle, incredible end. I think that he can be a lot more consistent, and he's another, it's going to sound bad, but dark horse guy that I think can be a potential top 30 pitcher in the MLB, honestly, with his stuff. I think his stuff is absolutely electric. I think when he is on top of his game, he is as good as honestly Hunter Green is. Maybe not at Hunter Green's absolute best, but in terms of a regular day for him. So I really like him. And honestly, when you think about it, if he's your number 4 or number 5 starter, he's probably one of the best 4 or 5 starters in baseball, to be honest with you. I really think he has that kind of stuff if he can find the consistency. If he can't find that consistency and he has those games where he's walking like 4 or 5 guys too often, then you start to question it, right? So I do believe we're going to get more of what we saw at the end of last season, because I do think it was such a dramatic shift that him being able to use the entire offseason to really hone and really get that delivery down is, I think, of utmost importance. And allowing him to do that, I think, should make him an automatic lock, at least for me, into this rotation, and should be that number 4 guy.
He's my number 5. I do love Graham Ashcraft, and
okay.
our listeners will find out anything. It is that Rob is the highest on Graham Ashcraft and TJ Antone, no matter what. Even when he was doing bad, I know he said he called for his head. He was in love with that guy.
He loves his
Doug.
Still.
I still think he's good too. I have him at number 5, but I'll talk about him now so we don't crisscross and everything.
For sure.
I really do like the adjustments he made in season. The consistency is the big thing. And honestly, after the top 3, and even Montas, because injury, but the consistency is the thing, right? So He's shown he has the stuff to get people out. He's shown that he can do a really good job. I think that another year in the majors could really help him. This is still a young players, while they're maybe older in age. Ashcraft is a little bit older. Still getting his experience playing in the big leagues.
Sure.
I think having him at 5, I think they're going to give someone else a nod at 4. And I'm not saying I think these 5 will end up being the rotation. I really do think that. My 5th guy, but I'm just going to say I think he's going to be in the rotation. I think it might be a way they break it up. And also, they'll start with these 5 guys because they've proven they can get guys out in the major leagues, but some of them have issues like consistency or injury. So.
Oh, okay. I'm really interested to see who you have at 4 then. But yes, I am a big Ashcraft guy. I think his stuff is way better than people give him credit for. But I want to hear who your number 4 is now.
Oh, it's Lodolo. If he's healthy, I think he's the guy. He's had his struggles. He's had injuries. I think, again, I really do think it's not a bad strategy, but I think David Bell's so obsessed with the right-left thing. You're going to go from a rotation that has right, left, right, left, right, and then you start over. So I think that could be it. I've heard some maybe 6-man rotations or something, but I think they cut it off. I think he has good stuff. I think it really just has been injury. And if he's your 5th starter, that's a good rotation. Or excuse me, if he's your 4th starter and Ashcraft's your 5th, that's a really good rotation. And then you have some guys who are going to provide some depth below that. I think these guys, you spent some draft capital on them. They've pitched well in the bigs. You spent money on guys like Montas. These 5 guys, I think, will start it, barring injury. And then if someone falls, like if Lodolo gets hurt or if Ashcraft has those inconsistencies, the leash is going to be shorter this year. And that might be good to make sure everyone's focused and ready to go. So that's my 4th. Maybe your 5th. I don't know.
Yeah, so I want to quickly read off the people who I think are in contention. I think it's Lodolo, I think it's Brandon Williamson, and I think it's Nick Martinez. I know everybody's going to be like, but they signed Nick Martinez for starter money. Sorry, guys. If you really, truly feel like that, stop it. Just stop it. Okay, he's been fine in both roles. I do think that he's a swingman. I actually heard a really interesting thing on 700. I forget who was talking about it, but they proposed that maybe he's that guy who eats up 2 or 3 innings in the middle of games if somebody has a shorter start, right? Or he can still be that bullpen guy. I think that that's what they signed him for. I'm taking him out of starter contention unless if he has just the most insane spring training where it's he's pitching every, 4th day or something like that, striking out pretty much everybody he sees, and they're like, we just got to get this guy innings. I'm taking him out of contention. I think it's between the 2 TCU boys of Lodolo and Williamson. And if he is healthy, it is going to go to Lodolo. And it's not because Brandon Williamson was not absolutely excellent compared to where he had started, at least. I think he was the most improved player actually for the Reds team, in the second half specifically. But I do think you have to go with Lodolo, man. When he was on his best, this guy was striking out everybody. I mean, there were multiple games of 10 strikeouts here, 11 strikeouts here. I mean, he was getting pizza for Reds fans by himself and going into the sixth inning of games. When he is healthy, he is elite. If he is your number 4 or your number 5 starter, you have legitimately one of the best rotations in baseball. Sure, there are really good ones, obviously. You have the Dodgers, you have the Braves, okay? You have those kinds of rotations. But if you can tell me that, again, a 4 or 5 starter is better than Lodolo or better than Ashcraft, I think you're crazy. And there are maybe a very select few. But there are 30 teams in baseball. I think that this rotation, at their absolute best, is a top 5 rotation. More than likely, I think they'll kind of settle somewhere into the top 10, top 12 area. But for right now, I do think it has to be Lodolo. I'm looking at their stats right now. I think that there are a couple really big things in why you would pick Lodolo. Number 1, everybody loves strikeouts. They're sexy, right? Well, Lodolo's striking out about 10% more batters than Williamson is. So, okay, that's good. The second big thing, walks, about 2% less from Lodolo as well. The last one, and I think the most important one, as a Reds player, even though I know Lodolo seemingly would give up random home runs all the time, his ground ball percentage is 9% higher. It's almost a 50-50 split, whereas Williamson is much more of a fly ball guy. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I really am high on this Reds team, obviously. I think you guys will hear that a lot. Joe's going to have to bring me down to times. That's fine. But I do think that he will agree this rotation has the potential. Truly, it's the potential to be one of the best rotations in baseball. But there's a lot of question marks. You still have Abbott coming out for his second season. You still have Montas coming off of injury. Lodolo coming off of injury. Ashcraft heading into his second-ish third season, right? Williamson, even if he comes up. Petty, Louder. All these guys are very young. And with pitching especially, much more than hitting, most of the time, it just takes a little bit of time for you to figure it out. That being said, I do want to just put it out there right now. I do think that Hunter Green is going to be in Cy Young contention. 100%. We're doing our rotation predictions. I'm just going to throw this out there that I really genuinely 100% believe that he is going to put it all together this season, and this will be the beginning of truly an incredible arc for what should be an incredible pitcher for the Reds. So I wanted to get that last little thought in there before we close anything out. Was there anything else you wanted to throw out there, Joe?
I guess we're on the same page with Green then. I'm with you. I think, to give my perspective, they are a B-plus rotation. A lot of that hinges on the depth. The only thing I would say is I liked getting Montas, but the whole offseason I would have loved to get a real ace.
Yep.
We haven't had the most money to spend. We haven't had the most opportunity to get an ace. I get it, but like a guy that you know is going to give you a lot of innings and going to have a low ERA and a guy that we can count on. So that's something that, like, yeah, it's a B+. They can play their way into an A if everyone lives up to the potential, or even most of the people live up to the potential. Yep. And I think also what comes down to is how David Bell uses them. I mentioned last week, wasn't a fan of always having the quick hook for starters. I get the analytics. I get all that stuff. But you're taxing the bullpen too. So these guys need to start going deeper into games. And I think now that they're older, now that they don't have some of the arm fatigue, now that they've gone through maybe a full season or maybe 2 or 3, that's going to be huge for them. So I do think this is a really good rotation. B+, if they can eat some more innings, if they can have the more consistency, less injury, then yeah, they could be up there at the top of the league.
And I completely agree with you. And I want to do a quick recap. So for Joe, we've got Hunter Green, Andrew Abbott, Frankie Montas, Nick Lodolo, and Graham Ashcraft. Those are his top 5. For me, I'm going to go Green. I'm going to go Abbott. I'm going to go Montas. I think I'm going to go Ashcraft and Lodolo last, just because he's going to be coming off injury. I think that they're going to want to give him as much time as absolutely possible. And I think with that 5th guy, most of the time you even skip that first week, that first time through the rotation. So if he needs that little bit of extra time, I think that that's why he might end up being their number 5. Let us know how we did, if you agree with us. And again, hopefully in the comment section before you got to this point, you had already put your predictions. If you end up copying one of us, we're going to know. We're going to know. We're going to figure it out, guys. So we won't actually know, but it's fine. It's, it is what it is. But We are really excited for Reds baseball to begin. Remember, first game against the Guardians is going to be this coming Saturday and Sunday. We will definitely be taking a look at those games. This is the Reds rundown, so we're going to run it down and talk about kind of what we saw, even though Joe doesn't like spring training games. It's okay, Joe. We're still going to have to look at some of the stats and what people did, even though they're going to get like one random at bat here or there and, one batter potentially. But yeah, it's something to talk about. So any final thoughts before we close it on out here?
No, I've been to spring training in person. I will go again. The Game House wants to foot that bill. I will be there drinking some margaritas in Arizona and watching the Reds. But yeah, it definitely is a tough sell. Not every fan. If you don't watch spring training, I don't think any less of you. If you do watch spring training, I don't think any more of you. Having this month is good for the players to get into a rhythm. But I'm excited to kind of like do the box score scouting thing for the first part. And then once we get into real games and like we have guys who aren't pitching with number 84 on their jersey or 89 who are like roster invites who are going up against some of our starters, it makes it more important. So excited to start getting to some baseball, exciting to have that in my life. You know what, Rob, I think one of the things I love most about sports too, and college basketball has this coming up too, is like daytime sports is so good. Everyone works from home these days, so having baseball come back, especially in the summer, like, hey, the Reds are playing at noon on a Thursday, that is awesome. That's what is awesome about baseball, and more sports should do that, honestly.
No, I completely agree with you, and I love that as a thought. You guys petition MLB to play more games in the afternoon, or I guess if you're a Cubs fan, you get them all the time. But regardless, that's how it goes. So, no, we really do appreciate you guys listening in and watching. As always, if you have constructive criticism for us to make this show better, or if you have topics that you would like for us to discuss, let us know. We are really more than happy to discuss them, especially before the season starts. So, yeah, we appreciate you listening in, and make sure to catch us next week on Monday. But with that, we'll catch you on the next one.